You were taught that being good means giving more, staying longer, forgiving faster, and asking for less. So you learned to call exhaustion kindness and silence strength. But here is the truth that hurts more than comfort ever could. You are not kind. You are useful. You are not loyal. You are predictable. And the people draining you know that. What you call love is often fear of being replaced. What you call goodness is often the habit of abandoning yourself before anyone else has to. Some people don't suffer because life is cruel. They suffer because someone keeps rescuing them from consequences. And when that someone is you, your life slowly collapses while theirs stays the same. Every time you step in to absorb pain that isn't yours, you teach them a dangerous lesson. Responsibility is optional as long as you exist. That's why your kindness feels heavy instead of fulfilling. You're tired in ways sleep can't fix. You feel invisible while being constantly available. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's the cost of confusing morality with self-erasure. Kindness without boundaries doesn't heal people. It trains them. Over time, your generosity becomes a silent contract where you bleed and they remain unchanged. Here is the line most people are afraid to cross. If your goodness requires your self-betrayal, it isn't goodness. It's fear pretending to be virtue. Real care doesn't erase you. And before you try to save another person, ask yourself one question honestly. Are you helping them grow? Or are you teaching them to survive at your expense? If this feels uncomfortable, that's because an old lie is cracking. Your exhaustion isn't a weakness. It's proof that the rules you've been living by are costing you too much. To understand why kindness keeps hurting you, you need a colder, clearer lens. And that lens begins with Machiavelli. More than 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli didn't study how people should behave. He studied how they actually do. And what he saw is still uncomfortable today. He didn't teach cruelty. He taught clarity. One truth cuts through everything. A person who tries to be good to everyone will be destroyed by those who are not. That's not cynicism. That's a pattern. Not everyone can be saved. And more importantly, not everyone wants to be saved. Some people don't want growth. They want relief. They don't want responsibility. They want to escape. And when you keep stepping in, you become that escape. Mercy without judgment doesn't create gratitude. It creates dependence. Remove consequences, and you don't heal anyone. You train them to stay broken. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming accurate. Kindness without boundaries isn't virtue. It's a weakness pretending to be moral. And self-protection isn't selfishness. It's intelligence learned the hard way. When you stop trying to save everyone, you don't lose your humanity. You stop bleeding for people who never planned to heal. Once you accept the hard truth that not everyone wants to be saved, a sharper question appears. Why are you always the one paying the price? The answer is uncomfortable, but freeing. You didn't choose this role. You were trained into it. From early on, you learned a quiet rule. Your value equals how much you give. Being good means enduring discomfort. Saying no means you're selfish or cold. So you learn to measure your worth by how much pain you could absorb for others. And because you are capable, responsible, and emotionally strong, the weight landed on you. This isn't kindness, it's conditioning. You don't step into the savior role loudly. You slide into it quietly. Guilt is what keeps you there. Every time you try to step back, the same thought stops you. If I don't help, who will? Niccolò Machiavelli would call this a strategic mistake, not a moral one. Energy is finite, time is finite. And every time you save the wrong person, you are investing in a future where you are weaker and more exhausted. Saving the wrong person isn't generosity. It's self-erasure disguised as virtue. Picture a small boat in open water. Pull everyone on board without judgment, especially those who refuse to row, and the boat doesn't become kind, it sinks. Or picture a fire started by someone who won't drop the match. If you keep running inside to save them, you're not brave. You're a volunteer casualty. This is the savior trap. You confuse responsibility with morality. You grab every hand that reaches out, even when it pulls you under. But stepping back isn't betrayal. It's clarity. Not every hand needs to be held. And saving the wrong person is the fastest way to lose yourself. Once you see the savior trap clearly, guilt doesn't fade. It panics. Because guilt was never morality. It was control. And the moment you stop asking why you're exhausted and start asking who benefits from it, the illusion breaks. What you're about to face isn't one enemy, but 7 faces of destruction, quiet, respectable, and perfectly designed to feed on your silence. Let's start with the first type, the one who brings chaos wherever they go. The chaos engine. This is the person you keep defending even as your own life becomes messier. You tell yourself they're just unlucky, that life keeps hitting them harder than most. But look closer. It's never just one problem. It's always another crisis, another explosion, another emergency that somehow requires your time, your money, or your emotional energy. They lose jobs, destroy relationships, burn bridges, and somehow none of it is ever their fault. The boss was unfair. The partner was toxic. The system was rigged. Bad luck follows them everywhere because responsibility never does. This is not misfortune. This is pattern. And here's the part that hurts to admit. When you step in to fix their mess, the chaos doesn't disappear. It relocates. It moves from their life into yours. You start covering for them, explaining their behavior, making excuses they never make for themselves. You lend money that never comes back. You recommend them for jobs they later sabotage. You spend emotional energy calming storms they keep creating. And each time, you hope this will be the turning point. It never is. Because the architect of chaos doesn't want stability. Stability requires accountability. Chaos gives them an excuse to stay the victim. Every disaster resets the story and keeps them from facing who they are becoming. The reason their life never improves is simple. They learn nothing from failure because you keep absorbing the consequences. You become their buffer against reality. And reality stops teaching them lessons. Instead, it teaches you stress. You start losing sleep. Your reputation takes hits. Your peace erodes. You feel drained but guilty for even thinking about stepping away. This is how capable people are destroyed quietly. Not by enemies, but by loyalty to someone addicted to dysfunction. Imagine tying your boat to a ship that's already taking on water. It doesn't matter how strong your vessel is or how pure your intentions are. Physics will win. When you tie your boat to a sinking ship, physics doesn't care about your intentions. You go down with it. The same law applies to human behavior. Chaos spreads through proximity. When you stay close to someone who refuses responsibility, you inherit their consequences. This isn't cruelty. It's cause and effect. Letting go doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped lying to yourself. You cannot rescue someone who keeps rebuilding the fire. You cannot stabilize a person who feeds on instability. And the hardest truth of all is this: the longer you stay, the more damage you allow. Protecting your peace is not abandonment. It is self-respect. Because if you keep anchoring yourself to their destruction, you will eventually drown alongside them. Second, The never enough. This one hurts more because it doesn't look dangerous at first. It looks like need. It looks like vulnerability. It looks like someone who just needs a little help to get back on their feet. The first time you help them, they are grateful. They thank you. They tell you they couldn't have done it without you. You feel useful. You feel seen. That's how the hook is set. The second time, the thanks are shorter. Less eye contact, less humility. By the third time, there is no gratitude at all. There is expectation. They don't ask anymore. They assume. And when you hesitate, when you pause, when you finally say, "You can't right now," something ugly appears. Irritation, guilt-tripping, coldness. This is the bottomless pit. No matter how much you pour in, it is never enough. Because the problem was never a lack of resources. It was a lack of character. Dependency changes people. When someone relies on you to survive, they don't feel appreciation. They feel entitled. And entitlement quietly turns into resentment. They begin to hate the very person they depend on, because your strength reminds them of their weakness. Your generosity highlights everything they refuse to become. So they take more. They ask for more. They demand more. And the more you give, the less human you become to them. You turn from a person into a supply line, from a friend into a function. This is why the people you help the most are often the first to turn on you. Not because you failed them, but because you stopped feeding the illusion that you owed them your life. The moment you close the tap, even slightly, the mask drops. You are suddenly selfish. You've changed. You're not the same anymore. This is not confusion. It's punishment. They are punishing you for reclaiming yourself. Helping someone like this doesn't make them stronger. It makes them smaller. It teaches them that someone else will always step in. And it teaches you that your boundaries are optional. Over time, you feel drained, resentful, and ashamed for feeling resentful. But here is the line that cuts through the guilt and needs to be remembered. An ungrateful person is not lacking resources. They are lacking character. You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not heartless for saying no. You are responding to a pattern that only survives because you keep sacrificing yourself. A bottomless pit cannot be filled. It can only be closed. Third, the poisoned smile. This one hurts the most because it comes from the people closest to you, not enemies, not critics, but friends, co-workers, even family members who claim they want the best for you. They smile when you talk about your goals, but something in their tone makes you hesitate. This is the smiling saboteur. The person who never tells you to stop, but always gives you just enough doubt to slow you down. Their sabotage doesn't sound like hatred. It sounds like a concern. They say they're just being realistic. They say they don't want to see you get hurt. But watch the pattern. You share good news, and they immediately point out what could go wrong. You talk about a new opportunity, and they remind you of every time you failed before. You stand at a turning point, and suddenly they are full of warnings. This is not protection. It is insecurity wearing the mask of care. Your growth threatens them, not because you are doing something wrong, but because your progress forces them to confront their own stagnation. So they begin to chip away at your confidence, slowly, quietly, in ways that are easy to deny. Are you sure now is the right time? Isn't that risky? What if you're overestimating yourself? They never say, "Don't go." They just make sure you hesitate long enough to miss the window. And if you succeed anyway, they minimize it. got lucky. Anyone could have done that. It's not that big of a deal. This keeps the balance comfortable for them. As long as you don't move too far ahead, they don't have to feel left behind. The danger is subtle. You start doubting your instincts. You stop sharing ideas. You feel guilty for wanting more. If you try to bring them along, the sabotage often gets worse. Drama appears right before important moments. Advice becomes confusing. Support becomes conditional, not because they hate you, but because they are afraid of losing their place in your life. This is why distance here is not cruelty. It is clarity. You don't need to accuse them. You don't need to argue. You just need to protect your momentum, share less, move quietly. Let results speak instead of plans. The people who genuinely support you will feel inspired, not threatened, by your growth. And remember this line, because it will save you years of confusion. Not everyone who stays close wants you to go far. Fourth, the emotional predator, the one that survives by feeding on your empathy. You don't feel drained at first. You feel needed. You feel compassionate. You feel like the one person who finally understands them. The professional victim doesn't threaten you or demand openly. They collapse in front of you. They tell you how hard life has been, how unfair people are, how impossible change feels for them. And because you have a heart, you step in, you listen, you support, you carry what they say they can't. But here's the truth most people miss. Their pain isn't just something they experience, it's something they become. Suffering turns into identity. Being broken becomes their role. And every time you help them, you don't heal them. You reinforce that role. They always have a reason why now isn't the right time to change. They're too depressed, too anxious, too damaged, too misunderstood. Solutions make them uncomfortable because solutions threaten the only thing that gives them attention, protection, and exemption from responsibility. When you offer a way out, they find a reason it won't work. When you encourage strength, they lean harder into weakness. Not consciously, but consistently. This is why helping them makes them weaker, not stronger. Because rescue removes the pressure that forces growth. And when you finally pull back, when you say you can't carry them anymore, the shift is immediate. The gratitude disappears. The tone changes. You are no longer kind. You are cruel. You abandoned them. You failed them. They rewrite the story so that your exhaustion becomes their injury. This is how empathy gets weaponized. You begin to doubt yourself. You feel guilty for wanting distance. You wonder if you are heartless. But look closely. They were never moving forward with you. They were leaning on you to avoid standing on their own. Compassion without limits doesn't save people like this. It pays them to stay stuck. It teaches them that helplessness works. And it teaches you that your role is to suffer quietly so they don't have to. This is not love. It's a transaction where you pay and they remain unchanged. Stepping back is not betrayal. It is the moment you stop funding their collapse. You are not responsible for carrying someone who refuses to carry themselves. And remember this, because it cuts through the guilt. Loving the wrong person turns you into the one who carries the blame. Or, as it truly is, caring for the wrong person makes you the one who gets punished. Fifth, the ego tyrant. This type drains you through conflict rather than need. You see the mistake before it happens. You warn them. You explain calmly. You even show evidence. And instead of listening, they attack you. Not because you're wrong, but because you threaten their ego. The arrogant fool isn't looking for the truth, they're looking for confirmation. They don't want to understand reality. They want reality to agree with them. So every conversation turns into a debate. Every warning becomes an insult. And every attempt to help becomes a battle you never agreed to fight. At first, you think patience will work. You think if you explain it one more time, they'll finally see it. But explanation only fuels them. They twist words. They argue semantics. They mock your caution. They laugh when you warn them about risks. And when things collapse exactly as you predicted, they don't reflect. They blame the system. They blame bad luck. They blame you for being negative. This is why arguing with them feels exhausting and pointless. You're not exchanging ideas. You're feeding a defense mechanism. Their pride is invested in being right, even if being right destroys them. And when you challenge that, you become the enemy. Over time, this dynamic wears you down. You start doubting your own clarity. You replay conversations in your head. You feel frustrated for caring more about their future than they do. But here's the truth that frees you. You cannot reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Logic doesn't work when the real issue is identity. To admit you're right would mean admitting they were wrong. And their ego cannot afford that cost. So they protect it at all costs, including their own well-being. The moment you stop engaging, something shifts. You regain energy. You regain peace. Silence becomes your boundary. Not coldness, not contempt, just refusal to bleed for someone who mistakes arrogance for confidence. Let reality do what conversation never could. Consequences teach lessons arguments cannot. And when they fall, because they will. Don't rush to say, "I told you so." Distance is enough. You were never meant to be their teacher. You were never meant to carry the frustration of someone addicted to being right. Remember this line when you feel tempted to step back into debate. No one learns a lesson they aren't ready to pay for. Walking away doesn't make you weak. It proves you value your clarity more than winning an argument you were never meant to win. Sixth, the trust killer. This one breaks people in a way nothing else can. Not because the betrayal is unexpected, but because it keeps happening. You forgive once because you believe in mistakes. You forgive twice because you believe in growth. You forgive again because they cry, because they promise, because they swear this time is different. And each time, you tell yourself that love means patience, that loyalty means endurance. The repeating betrayer learns something from every second chance you give. Not accountability, permission. They learn how much damage they can cause and still be welcomed back. The pattern is always the same. Apology, tears, excuses. A short period of good behavior. Then the same wound, reopened with more precision. This isn't bad luck. It isn't a misunderstanding. It's behavior repeating itself. And repeated behavior is not an accident. It's a character. When you forgive without consequences, you don't heal the relationship. You remove the cost of betrayal. You teach them that your boundaries are flexible and your pain is survivable. Over time, something dangerous happens. They stop fearing the loss of you. And when someone no longer fears losing you, they stop respecting you. This is why unconditional forgiveness doesn't create loyalty. It creates calculations. They begin to think ahead. If they took me back after that, they'll take me back after this. You become predictable, safe to hurt, easy to return to. And every time you accept them again, something inside you shrinks. Your self-respect erodes. Your intuition goes quiet. You start doubting your right to be angry. You ask yourself if you're overreacting, even when the evidence is clear. This is the real damage of repeated betrayal. Not what they do to you, but what you learn to accept. Walking away from a repeating betrayer is one of the hardest decisions because it feels like giving up on redemption. But here is the truth most people avoid. You are not ending the relationship. They ended it the first time they chose themselves over your trust. You are simply refusing to participate in the aftermath. Distance is not punishment, it is protection. You don't owe endless access to someone who has proven they cannot be trusted with it. Forgiveness does not require proximity, and loyalty does not require self-betrayal. There is a point where mercy stops being noble and starts being suicidal. Remember this line when guilt pulls you back. Forgiveness without limits is not holiness. It is self-destruction. Choosing yourself is not bitterness. It is survival. This one is hard to name because it hides behind neutrality. Seventh, the silent bystander. They never insult you. They never betray you openly. They never attack. They simply disappear when it matters most. The silent bystander is the person who claims they don't want drama, who says they don't like taking sides, who believes staying quiet makes them mature. When you are treated unfairly, they lower their voice. When someone crosses a line with you, they change the subject. When your name is dragged through the mud, they stay comfortably silent. You tell yourself they're just avoiding conflict, that they mean well, that not everyone is built for confrontation. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Their silence has a cost, and you are the one paying it. Every time they choose neutrality in the face of harm, they protect themselves at your expense. They don't need to hurt you directly, because their inaction gives permission to those who do. Over time, this creates a quiet betrayal. You stand up for them. You defend them when they're not in the room. You show loyalty. But when the pressure shifts to you, they vanish. They don't correct lies. They don't draw boundaries. They don't say your name out loud when it would cost them comfort. And this imbalance eats at you. You begin to question whether you're asking for too much, whether expecting support is unreasonable. It isn't. Loyalty is not loud, but it is visible. The silent bystander mistakes peace for goodness. But peace that depends on injustice is not peace. It is cowardice with better branding. Their fear of conflict teaches others that you are safe to mistreat. Bullies notice who speaks up and who stays quiet. So do manipulators. Silence becomes a signal. This is why the damage feels so deep. It's not just what happened to you. It's who watched it happen and did nothing. And the longer this pattern continues, the smaller you make yourself to keep the relationship. You stop bringing things up. You swallow anger. You learn to suffer quietly so no one feels uncomfortable. That is the trap. Distance here is not cruelty. It is self-respect. You don't need them to fight every battle for you. You only need to know they won't disappear when it counts. If someone's comfort always matters more than your dignity, they are not neutral. They have chosen a side. Remember this line when guilt tries to pull you back. Silence in the face of injustice is still taking the side of the harm. After all the patterns, all the faces, and all the names, there is one question most people try to avoid. What if your need to save others was never about them at all? What if it was a way to stay busy so you didn't have to sit with yourself? Helping becomes a distraction when silence feels dangerous. Fixing others feels productive when looking inward feels overwhelming. Some people don't rescue because they are strong. They rescue because stopping would force them to feel an old wound they never learned how to face. This doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. but it does make the cycle repeat. When you pour energy into broken systems, you postpone your own healing. You stay in motion so you don't have to be still. And stillness is where the truth waits. This is not a criticism. It's an invitation. A different kind of work begins when you stop asking who needs you and start asking what part of you learned that love requires suffering. That journey doesn't give instant clarity or dramatic breakthroughs. It gives honesty. And honesty is quieter than chaos, but far more powerful. Remember this as the final shadow settles. Sometimes the person you spend your life trying to save is a version of yourself that never learned how to be safe. At some point, this stops being about other people. It becomes about the moment you finally notice how much of your life has been spent reacting, rescuing, explaining, and enduring. You weren't broken for caring. You were just never taught when to stop. But clarity changes everything. When you stop chasing chaos, chaos loses its grip. When you stop feeding broken patterns, they collapse on their own. The world doesn't reward endless sacrifice. It rewards discernment. The strongest shift you will ever make isn't becoming colder. It's becoming precise. You don't harden your heart. You narrow your focus. You learn that peace isn't found by saving everyone, but by choosing wisely where your energy goes. This is not abandonment. It's maturity. And once you cross that line, there is no going back. Because you finally understand something most people never do. Your life is not a rescue mission. It is a responsibility.